Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Ryan Davis, and I'm a junior studying economics at the college. I'm also the chair of the JFK Junior Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag Panama Paradise, which is also listed in your program. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guests, Marina Guevara, Frederik Obermaier, Vaidyanathan Iyer, and tonight's moderator, Samantha Henry.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Samantha Henry from the Nieman Foundation for Journalism here at Harvard. And we're delighted to have with us three outstanding journalists tonight who are members of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or the ICIJ, which has pioneered a new model of cross-border journalism that is having an incredible global impact. We will talk tonight about two of their most recent investigations, the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. And this series represents the largest cross-border reporting collaboration in the history of journalism. It involved millions of documents and hundreds of journalists working together in dozens of countries around the globe. I want to introduce you first to Frederik Obermaier. Frederik is an investigative reporter at Süddeutsche Zeitung, the largest daily newspaper in Germany. He's one of the two reporters who received the leaked documents from a secret source that launched both of these investigations. And he is studying here at Harvard this year as a Nieman Journalism Fellow. Marina Guevara is the Deputy Director of the ICIJ. She oversaw both the Panama and Paradise Paper series and was responsible for coordinating these massive worldwide investigations through multiple languages, different time zones, and more than 300 reporters on 6 continents. Our final panelist, who may be a familiar face to many of you here at the Kennedy School, is Vaidyanathan Iyer. Vaidi is a member of the ICIJ and the National Affairs Editor of the Indian Express, arguably the most influential newspaper in India. And he is also currently a Mason Fellow and a graduate student here at the Kennedy School this year. What many of his classmates may not realize is while he was taking classes and studying for exams by day at HKS, by night he was meeting in secret with Frederik all over campus to pull off one of the largest investigative journalism feats ever accomplished. For his work on the Panama and Paradise Papers, Vaidi was just awarded the highest journalism honor in India, the Ramnath Goenka Award, their version of the Pulitzer Prize. And Marina and Frederik and the team at ICIJ were awarded the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting, among many other awards for these series. Now, you all have maybe heard bits and pieces about the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers. Everyone from Vladimir Putin's inner circle to the Queen of England to U2's lead singer Bono were named in these reports. But what exactly are these investigations about, and what has the impact been? If Frederik, you could start us off with explaining what these investigations are about and how they came about.
Well, thanks a lot for having us here. Actually, the Panama Papers started with an encrypted message my colleague Bastian Obermaier received. It was somebody calling himself John Doe and asking if we would be interested in data and information. And that's a question we actually hear many times, but in few occasions something comes by it, something interesting, something newsworthy. In this case, we learned pretty soon that the source offered internal data of a law firm called Mossack Fonseca in Panama. And Mossack Fonseca at that time was not known in the public, I would say. We heard about it once when we investigated a German arms and weapons trades scandal, when we stumbled across a shell company that was founded by Mossack Fonseca. but we didn't find out who was standing behind it. So at the first moment, we thought we could solve that mystery, but then when we received more and more data, and in the end it was more than 2 terabyte of data, we saw that it's by far bigger. In the end, we didn't solve the mystery about that weapons trade, but we found more than a dozen of current or former world leaders, among them the Prime Minister, or the now former Prime Minister of Iceland, members of the family of the Pakistani Prime Minister. We found the best friend of Vladimir Putin, Sergei Roldugin, a guy who, together with other Putin associates, shuffled around about $2 billion through a network of shell companies and banks. And in the end, it became a project of ICIJ with more than 400 journalists all around the world reporting on it. And I personally thought that after we published it, I could have a long break. I applied for Harvard at that time. And then, well, something happened. We received, or news sources turned up, people sending us hints what could be in the Panama Papers, but also people sending us information and data. In the end, it was that much information about the offshore world that we could not do nothing, or only going to Harvard, or my colleague Bastian went to Michigan for a fellowship. We received data from another, for example, law firm called Appleby, and contrary to Mossack Fonseca was considered already in the business world as, or in the financial sector, as a shady player. There was rumors of Mossack Fonseca helping associates of Bashar al-Assad, for example, of hiding money or helping to hide money from the Libyan government and stuff like that. But Appleby, in contrary, was considered to be a good one. They were part of the so-called offshore magic circle. They even were the offshore, I think, what was the official name? Offshore Company of the Year.
Yes.
So they were the good ones.
There's an award.
Okay. And when we received that data, well, we were a little bit surprised that it was not that shiny in reality, and that we saw a lot of wrongdoings, failures in the compliance sector, and we then decided to get to share that information again with ICIJ and the journalists that are members of the ICIJ, because we had also received data from another trust company that was called Asia City, and the company registries of 19 secrecy jurisdictions. So we, together with ICIJ, made it a new project called Paradise Papers, and that ruined the first half of my fellowship here in Harvard.
Now I want to turn to Marina. You received this massive amount of documents, and this is a school for management and leadership. So how did you take this huge network of people all over the globe in different time zones, writing in different languages, and synthesize this information and organize these investigations?
Well, I think the first thing to clarify is that in reality, we need to acknowledge investigative reporters are not collaborators. Sharing is not in our DNA. We are taught in university to hoard information, to scoop others, to work in private. A lot of the biggest scoops in the history of the world have been by lone wolves, investigative reporters, and bless their hearts, they have changed the world. But today we live in a world that is too global, too complex, and the stories are just too big for any single reporter or single media organization to tackle on their own. What is that noise? That's interesting.
We're still kind of under construction.
So this was one of those cases when we received those 11 million records. We thought, wow, we have this network of reporters in more than 65 countries. It's almost like we had been for 20 years building this network of trust, waiting for the perfect story, and here was the perfect story. It was this window into a secret world, into a world that at that time we thought it was like a parallel universe, where rogues lived and operated, and that later, especially with Paradise Papers, we realize it's not a parallel economy, it's the economy. It's the mainstream economy. It's the way that we have structured our society and our economy today, in which the wealthiest and the most powerful have a niche of secrecy where they can operate, where they can avoid not only taxes but also scrutiny. So going back to the journalism, it was a huge opportunity to wrangle these reporters around the world. We synthesize our approach with, I call it the 3 T's: trust, technology, and teamwork. The trust is something that you build over time, and we have built a story after a story over 20 years. It's not trust among media organizations. People ask me, your network of media organizations, and I say it's a network of human beings. You can't trust. I don't trust any media organization. I don't know if you do. I love the media. I work for the media, but I trust human beings. I trust him, and I trust Vaidi. And so trust, so we can have one another's backs. Especially from reporters that are working in very difficult environments in our network in Russia and China and in other places. Technology, that's a huge advantage that we have today. We can work with 11 million records, with 13 million records at Paradise Papers. We can grab them all like we did with the help of technologists and engineers. That's the new newsroom. It's not just journalists, not just reporters and editors. It's engineers, it's developers, it's technicians. And they helped us using open source, because we also don't have money, as you can imagine. So we use open source tools to extract these documents, to make them readable, to make them shareable, because they were a mess when they arrived. These leaks, they are completely chaotic when they arrive. And we transformed them. We deployed 30 machines to process, to index the documents, and to make them available in a platform that it would be like a Google platform, but secure, as secure as we could make it. So journalists all over the world were able to access it. We took that controlled risk of putting the information online because we realized that the only way we were going to be able to tell this story was if we had that local knowledge from reporters in Chile, in India, in Indonesia, in Greece. All corruption is primarily local. So we needed the local knowledge to construct the global story. That was the technology. We even use artificial intelligence in some of our analysis in Paradise Papers to be able to, for example, quickly identify certain documents that were key. Loan agreements are super important because loan agreements are one way that these people disguise tax avoidance strategies. So they just shuffle money. Like that's what Putin's circle was doing. They were shuffling these loans all over the world, going through the US also. They were all like 30 years, 1% loans. So with artificial intelligence, we were able to quickly grab all the documents, teach a computer to identify all the loan agreements, and make an index so we can more readily and in a speedy way go through them. Anyway, let's talk about technology. We can do that later. The last one is teamwork. Is having clear set of rules that everyone observes around the world, and those rules are simple. This is a confidential investigation. We don't talk about it with anybody, not even with your spouse. There's a sacred embargo for the information. We all publish at the same time, and nobody goes before. And sharing has to be radical. That was the other principle. We don't hold back anything. We share everything in real time. As we make discoveries, we use yet another open source platform to share the findings with the rest of the team, to construct together the global story. And of course, security. We had, especially for Paradise Papers, 100% encryption use, as well as two-factor authentication. And we're not talking only about young reporters, that we're working with all generations of reporters and with reporters with all kinds of levels of knowledge of technology, but they all understood the importance, especially at this time of that security.
Fantastic. It's a great model for journalism going forward. We'll talk a little more about that. I want to turn to Vaidi for a second and talk a little bit about, so you spoke about the local knowledge that's so essential to reporting these things in country. You did some incredible investigations that also not only impacted around India, but also in the region. If you could talk a little bit about some of the impact in India and beyond.
Yeah, so, in India, we were in a very peculiar kind of stage of a new government having come in, and the entire political narrative at that point of time was around corruption and black money. The party which came to power came on the back of two agendas. One was to eliminate corruption and kind of seize black money or money stashed in Swiss banks, as it is talked about in India. And the other part was about development. But it is corruption and black money and punishing the rich, which was like the flavor in India. So the Panama Papers kind of came, the revelations came around, in April, and this was a big topic in India. It was very interesting that, of course, million plus documents, and in India, like when you went on searching about India files, there were, roughly about 40,000 files, and we were basically, even in those 40,000 files, we were actually looking as if we are looking for a needle in a haystack. And so we realized, that there were about 425, to be precise, Indians in the Panama Papers, and ours was quite a humongous task, because when you have a precise number of people who are beneficiaries or shareholders in offshore entities, so you have to basically ensure that all of them are covered, because you can't really play, if you don't disclose or write about 10 names, then there are so many questions raised about that. So we although three of us were working on this investigation, but we involved our entire reporting team across the country, about 30 odd reporters who fanned out and went to each address, each physical location were verified, and then detailed questionnaires were sent as per the guidelines which ICIJ had circulated about when you can send the questions to the individuals who are there. But many interesting things happened post the Panama Papers, like, say, for instance, a government which is bent on rooting out corruption can also can also look at acts of bravado, if I may say. In India, actually, this took a leap of faith in the government actually going into an exercise called demonetization, where 86% of all currency one fine evening in India were declared as banned. So, 500 and 1,000 rupee notes in India, which constitute almost 86% of the total currency in circulation, they were banned and there was huge political support to it. Why? Because the people thought that this kind of move will actually help eliminate corruption. And the Prime Minister, being such an eloquent speaker in India, he actually convinced people that it will be the rich who will be punished. But at the end of the day, it were untold hardships to a large segment of the poor in India, who didn't have daily money to transact or trade or buy their daily stuff, because the informal economy in India is large. But the Panama Paper revelations were also kind of shocking to Indians, because for the first time we could actually name people, carrying on from earlier tie-ups with investigations with ICIJ. We could name people and tell our readers what were they exactly doing, where were they setting up offshore entities, how they kind of hid their names. So it was like lifting of the kimono, so to say, where you are unveiling something which has always remained secret. And these were all public figures in India. They were some businessmen and famous personalities who were close to the government. So, people for once realized that, you pay all the taxes, whereas, there is a bunch of elite in the country which manages to avoid taxes. And the blurring line between avoidance and basically evasion was what was highlighted during the Panama Papers investigation.
And this kind of emerging picture from both the investigations of a global elite that has a lot in common when you read through this stuff. We have talked about this before, how many of the things you discovered are legal, but are they correct? Are they right? And are these systems going to change? A lot was made of the stuff you guys found about Apple, holding their money offshore, not paying taxes. Some of that is being addressed, but if you want to talk about some of the line between, it may still be legal, these offshore corporations.
I think that the order of events was perfect, and we didn't control it, because Panama Papers needed to create that first shock, and it did, because it showed just how much criminality is involved in the offshore world. It showed the money launderers, it showed the traffickers, the drug dealers, it showed the dirty money. And even the enablers and the banks and the advisors, everybody was outraged with Panama Papers. It was easy, right? Because it was a banana republic, and I'm saying it respectfully, I like Panama a lot, but that's the way they were looking at it. Finally, these guys who bring bad reputation to the offshore world are named, and now we know who they are. And then here it comes Paradise Papers a year later, and it shows that it's not just the banana republics, that an elite firm in London and in the main capital of the world, working with the biggest law firms and the best known financial advisors and the biggest banks, they were doing the same. The level of criminality perhaps was a tad less, but among the clients, but the immorality was the same. And the aggressiveness and the just outrageousness of the behavior. And so, and that's why also Paradise Papers got a lot, but I don't know what you feel, but I feel like we got a lot more pushback from Paradise Papers, because Paradise Papers goes to the heart of the beast, and it shows it for what it is, and it shows just how ingrained the offshore world is in our society, in our economy. If you think, in the Paradise Papers, we had Ivy League schools, we had Democrats and Republicans. The single biggest pot of money that we found in the Paradise Papers was a trust in Bermuda for about $8 billion, projected to be $30 billion in 2030, and it belongs to one of the biggest donors of the Democratic Party. We wrote a whole story with the New York Times about him, James Simons, one of the founders of Renaissance Technologies. And that's money that has been sitting in Bermuda for no clear reason, avoiding taxes for many, many, many years. And so Paradise Papers shows the Apple money, the Nike money, the Apple money that now has been rewarded with a tax break. So Apple keeps $260 billion offshore. It tells the Senate, the US Senate, that they have never worked in fiscal paradises, and then Paradise Papers shows that they did exactly that. And now they are rewarded with a 15% tax if they return that money to the US. So it is really a false dichotomy, the legal-illegal. The industry has been for 50 years using the argument, it is all legal. It is perfectly legal. And we have been repeating it, and even journalists have repeated it. I think I have even written stories in the past where we said, and it is perfectly legal, because that was the line. And it meant, don't worry about it, don't look into it. And now the debate has shifted, in part because of these disclosures. And people are asking, should it be legal? Why is it legal? And regulators are looking into specific cases, and they are finding out that actually many of these structures are not legal, are actually illegal.
And if I may add one aspect, I think we are tending to speak about tax avoidance and tax evasion. But what the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers also showed, how shell companies are used for corrupt practices, for plundering whole continents. One of the, I think, most important cases in the Paradise Papers was the case about Glencore, the world's biggest commodity trader based in Switzerland. They're doing business in DRC, and how they used an Israeli businessman to get mining licenses. This businessman, he's called Dan Gertler. He's now, after the Paradise Papers, he was sanctioned by the US. This was, in my opinion, perfect case where we saw how these shell companies are used to hide money flow. And that's not about tax evasion. That's not about tax avoidance. That's about what we think and what looks like pure corruption. And that is something we should always be aware of, because, I mean, there are experts, for example, pointing out that if you would get rid of opaque company structures that enable billions of dollars flowing out of the continent of Africa, you wouldn't need to pay aid to the African continent, because this is illicit money flowing out, and we are all helping it if we do not question this whole system of intransparent company structures that is there since decades and unquestioned, as you mentioned, for a long time, even by journalists.
You mentioned also that you would see the same players come up again and again as you did these investigations.
My first project in this whole tax haven corruption field was when ICIJ invited me to the project called Offshore Leaks. That was 2013. And after that came Swiss Leaks. That was another project about HSBC. And we have names that turned up in Offshore Leaks, Swiss Leaks, then Panama Papers, and again in Paradise Papers. This shows a pattern. It's a group of people using these structures, and they are not using only one enabler, not only one law firm, not only one consulting company, they are using several, because it's a whole industry profiting from it.
Fascinating. Now, both you and Vaidi have worked in traditional newsrooms for quite a while. How is this different from a journalistic point of view, working on a story where your colleagues are around the world? I mean, you guys knew each other electronically before you ever met in Cambridge. So
well, we met actually at one meeting that we had at the beginning of the Panama Papers, where around about 100 journalists met in Munich, and we had to create a cover story because we couldn't even tell our colleagues in Munich what we are doing. I mean, they asked us because they saw, for example, a colleague of Vadi, Ritu. She came in a traditional Indian clothing, and we had colleagues, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? And we had to find out basically live, for a better reason, to our colleagues, telling them, well, we are having something like a journalism conference. We are exchanging international ideas, what you could do, and our views on journalism. And at that time it was or easier, at least for us, not for ICIJ, I guess, but for us, we were a German newspaper where most of the world had never heard of, couldn't even spell the name, Süddeutsche Zeitung. It's difficult, I know. And we were not that famous for international collaborations. But after Panama Papers, there was media reports about Panama Papers mentioning Süddeutsche. So when during Paradise Papers, or the preparation for it, we had another meeting in Munich.
That was the 140 reporters.
Yeah, and that made us a huge headache. We even thought about renting houses apart from our headquarters to host it. But in the end, we decided to do it in our headquarters, and we needed another cover story. This time it was, well, ICIJ has a new structure, so they decided to do a meeting of the members. So we are that nice because we owe ICIJ a lot, so we offered to host it. But of course, it was a meeting.
So this year you're Harvard students. I get it.
We are, really.
We are having a meeting around
Yeah,
the
let's see
In
what
fact,
comes out next.
The second meeting at Munich, just prior to the Paradise Papers, when I and two of my colleagues flew down to Munich for the conference, many people thought that they're being rewarded and they're going on a junket for to Munich for the work at Panama. But yeah, I think we kept it even inside our office, like not except for the editors and very senior leadership team. Nobody really knew that there was a conference and there was something which is coming up. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about this as an incredible model for journalism as newsrooms are shrinking all over. But I want to take questions from the audience. So if you have a question, there are microphones here, and there's some up in the forum seats up at top. And please just identify yourself and kindly keep it brief, and then make sure it's a question. So I just want to ask you one more question, then we'll go to the audience. As these networks become increasingly global, the elite network, I love this concept of journalists also kind of fighting on the same level. You know, journalists banding together all around the world. I mean, do you think it's a replicable model, or is it something ICIJ just?
We actually, journalists are late to globalization. You know, business, criminals, law enforcement, they've all been working in networks. They've all been working transnationally for a long time. They've all been using technology. And we hadn't. You know, we were in our little newsrooms and we were comfortable. And we are late. And we still need to catch up. We still need to be getting even smarter with our use of technology. We still don't know very well what we're doing with big data in many cases. We still don't understand security and digital security. So, but Panama Papers and Paradise Papers showed what I call the power of the pack, when the lone wolves band together and they go united after stories of public interest. It protects us. The network protects us because imagine, you know, I remember before Panama Papers, we were talking to our lawyers, and our lawyers at ICIJ, they were saying, well, we anticipate dozens of lawsuits. We were going after so many rich and powerful people. And it turned out that it wasn't as bad at all. Because, you know, who are you going to sue also? We are 400. We have worked on this story for a year. We have shielded the story in every way we can. We have traveled the world. We have eyes and ears in all the countries that we needed to. So it just makes us more difficult to intimidate. Not impossible, and we have suffered losses as well in our network. But it makes us stronger. And that's how we need to be in the complicated world that we are reporting about these days.
Great. Firstly, just to say a huge acknowledgement. You know, it takes incredible courage to do the amazing work that you folk do. I'm a Harvard fellow, 2017 and 2018. And I have two questions. The one is, if there's still more to come other than what you've uncovered, what is the position on the ICIJ in terms of stuff that hasn't yet come out that people are aware of? And my second question is, in terms of your approach and methodology with Panama, you kind of started, you got the leak in Panama. Is that the kind of approach? Or if there was an approach that said, here are major banks in a country that are doing this, where you're starting at the different end of the chain, would you incorporate that approach as well?
Thank you for your questions. We have done that approach more often than the leaks. You know, the leaks are sexy and they have caused a lot of, you know, outrage around the world. But our preferred approach and the way that investigative reporters work is like, you don't get leaks. You do it the hard work, the hard way. You go, for example, we did investigation on the World Bank and the displacement policies of the World Bank. And what we did is we scraped all the data from the World Bank. We used public data, bank data, to show how people were being displaced all over the world through World Bank projects, and then we did the reporting on the ground, and then we gathered the documents. So the rarity is these leaks, but we were fortunate and privileged to be the recipients of this information. We saw it as an opportunity to show a new form of doing investigative reporting. And we realized that we had one chance, and if we failed, if the information leaked, if the documents leaked, if we made mistakes, then we were not only harming ourselves, harming ICIJ or Süddeutsche Zeitung, we were harming a whole model of collaboration for the future of journalism. We needed to prove a concept that had been only proven in a very small scale, and now we were taking it globally. We have more stories that we're working on all the time. We are doing more of the traditional projects that I just mentioned before, and there's a lot of whistleblowers out there. They like this model. They like it because they find it efficient, because they go to one place and the information gets shared with a network of trusted media all over the world. They like it because we do our very best to protect those sources. We believe very firmly that the star should always be the story and never the journalist and never the source. And so we are happy that ICIJ is perceived in a very positive light by whistleblowers, and the doors are open. And there's a lot of data out there.
And adding to that, I think this whole bunch of data, if it were offshore leaks, Swiss leaks, now Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, this is something like a treasure trove. You always go back. So I think for most of the partners in this project, whatever they are investigating, it's a normal step in their daily work now to check those names in the data. And even if it is not labeled like Paradise Papers or Panama Papers, I would say that there's weekly stories coming out all around the world that are in parts at least based on Panama Papers or Paradise Papers. And I think it will even be in the future, because this is such a vast amount of data. We could only search for, in a way, what we are looking for. So we searched for names, we searched for phrases like red flags or technical terms. But imagining, for example, that in one country like Germany, where I come from, being a politician that is now completely unknown, becoming chancellor in 8 or 9 years, then of course this would be a name that I would like search for in the database. But now I wouldn't, because I don't know who this politician is. So I think this is something that we would still rely on in the future. And we had stories in Paradise Papers that were basically a mix of all those leaks together with public available documents and information, because you have to imagine it as different puzzle pieces. There's the Paradise Papers puzzle piece, the Panama Papers puzzle piece, then there's official, for example, court records, there's company databases, and only together you see the whole picture. So we had stories that we couldn't do in the Panama Papers because we had some information missing, so we didn't see the whole picture. Together with the Paradise Papers piece, we saw a picture and did a story, and I think it may be in the future as well, the future projects we are working on.
Just very quickly, we're doing a very exciting project that we have said it publicly. So with the Panama and the Paradise Papers, we have called for local reporters in the US who are covering higher education to come work with us on a project called Alma Mater, which looks at the offshore connections of state and private universities in the United States. We have information of more than 100 universities in the Paradise Papers and Panama Papers, and it shows how they also systematically and as a group have been exploiting the offshore world to grow their endowments. And endowments, as you know, is one of the least transparent part of university life. So we are working with a small group of state reporters, and in a few weeks you will start seeing their stories. I think they're going to be important.
Is there a question up there?
Hey, my name is Braden. I'm a freshman at the college from Mississippi studying government. I've got an easy question. So each of you in your positions have helped change the way that we view the world's elite. So my question is, What advice do you have for students now who are aspiring to make an impact and to continue this trend of holding those in power accountable?
Sounds easy, but isn't that easy? I think one advice that I received from my former boss who brought me into the Offshore Leaks project was basically, no matter how old you are, trust in your skills. So if you look, I mean, Marina mentioned it briefly, the whole Panama and Paradise Papers team varies tremendously in regards to age and status. There are journalists that are in their early 20s but doing an amazing job because they have skills that they have learned at university or learned themselves, like, for example, programming, skills in dealing with big data and data journalism that people in our senior level haven't learned. And so bringing it all together and trusting the skills that moved us all forward, I think, because only together we've bring together the traditional style of reporting, going out, meeting sources, then having the data aspect aside, then having the classical reporter who opens the human stories, and that together, I think that helped us a lot.
Yeah. I would say learn to work in teams and to work. It's not about you. It's about who you surround yourself with as well. So learn to work in teams and be a disruptor. Don't take the ideas that are, even the ones that are taught here, for granted. That's what we were saying before when we're starting to question things that are legal. So instead of saying they are legal, let's question, are they moral? Should they be legal? How can they be different? My aspiration when people say, where do we start when we think about reforming the offshore world, and has the change been enough? And I said, no, it hasn't been enough. And it hasn't been enough because all of those who need to reform this world are part of the world. So my hope is the students. You are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. You are going to be working at the elite law firms and at the elite accounting firms. You are going to be the prime ministers and the presidents. And are you going to hold the view of the economy that holds these spaces of privilege and secrecy for the 1%? Or are you going to push for an economy that is inclusive, that is fair, and that is just for all? And that is going to get you a lot of trouble to propose that kind of thing. But it starts here. It starts at the university level and what we are teaching and how we are learning.
Yeah, to my mind, I think the biggest asset that one can have throughout his career is curiosity. That is, I think, strongly missing in as you grow older in an organization. Also, I see many journalists in my country actually becoming cynics and saying that nothing will change. But when you start questioning your own beliefs, your own assumptions, or what has been the social conditioning, so to say for instance, a very interesting example was when you get a multiple answer question, and you say that A, B, C, D, E, choose one of the options, and you are not penalized, for instance, for choosing the wrong answer. You can say A, B, C, D, or E, anything, but that in some way propagates what bullshit can be, because you are conditioned from the beginning. This was something which we learned in one of our classes at Harvard, and it is so true, because you then think that you can get away with an answer because there is no penalty for that. So I think that curiosity and questioning the assumptions that you have and the social conditioning that you are in the environment, I think that is so critical.
And then finally, the future is data, and that's for journalists or for any other profession. So we need to master data, big data, and the technology that can help us. We can't take a year to do Panama Papers. We need to be taking less time. It was a long time, and in part it was because it was such a big team and it was the first time. But looking back, we could have taken advantage of technology even way more than we did.
Thank you.
You have a question?
Good evening. Thank you for speaking with us. You spoke a lot about the power of the consortium to allow you to tell relevant stories in each country, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the challenge of telling what you call the global narrative, and it sounds like the broader problem that the papers revealed is one that spans across the entire globe and involves a lot of jurisdictions and a lot of different kind of audiences and a patchwork of different folks. So can you talk a bit about how effective you think you were in constructing a story about sort of the big picture problem?
I don't know, help me here. I think we try to, the idea was that not to tell a million individual little stories, but to try to construct the story and to try to find like the enablers of the system and the victims. Many times we write about these financial issues and we forget to connect with regular people. And we put a lot of effort to connect and to make sure that every teacher and bus driver and policeman who read the stories saw herself or himself in the story as the victim, because they are. We are all the losers here in this story, right? And so, so it was. We made a deliberate effort through videos, through explainers, through interviews in the field, connecting why the big the grand corruption case or the tax avoidance scheme is robbing your children of better roads, schools, future.
And I think we learned a lot from Panama Papers. So if I speak about our newspaper, we learned that sometimes us, the reporters who did the investigation, are too much into the details, into the technical details. So we decided, in this case, for example, to separate things a little bit. So we, the reporters who did the investigation, wrote a first draft and then handed it to a writer who was not involved yet to get a new view. And I think all of our stories became by far better because it was somebody who did not read the small print in all these contracts, spoke with lawyers, with professors, and was already in the offshore lingo world, where you only speak about bearer shares and nominee directors. And if you then get a new colleague who hears it the first time, like, what? A bearer share? What's that? Nominee director? Come tell me, what is it? Here, a nominee director is somebody who is not leading a company but is pretending to do so. A bearer share is a piece of paper who owns it, who has it in his hand physically, is the owner of a company. And by doing so, it enables money laundering. So I think that helped us a lot. But still, I'm not sure if we couldn't do better. So we, for example, at our newspaper, we learned that we have to do more for younger audiences. Because it is at first glance, a very technical topic, but as Marina mentioned, it affects all of us. Because if people evade taxes, if people avoid taxes, this is money missing for our streets, for universities. Here in the US, you have to pay for universities. You have to pay a lot for your healthcare. If there were not tax avoidance and tax evasion, the government would have by far more money, and you wouldn't have to worry about stuff like that. And we should keep that in mind if you speak about preschools. I mean, it's crazy what you have. Sorry, but what you have to pay here for a preschool. Yeah, I have a child, and that's. I was shocked when we came here. So I think that's something where we have to connect the dots a little bit more, and also have to try to tell the same story for different audiences in another language. Sometimes in a simpler language, sometimes in a little bit more technical language with more details, where we can also put out the original files documenting what we have found to enable experts to have a look on it, but also having a very simple way of telling it without losing the facts.
One thing which I realized that, while we have been telling a lot of stories across our partners in various countries, if you just zoom out, you kind of realize that there is a set of people who have access and opportunities to all the expertise that is available across the world, who make the most out of such legal expertise or tax expertise that they get. And there is a large percentage of the population which is which is, the majority, a big majority, which is not able to partake in this growth story. And when you tell stories of how the elites are kind of gaming the system, you also tell the story to people that they are not really able to have all these opportunities, they are being left out. And now the attention shifts completely to those small group of elite, which kind of tends to give an impression to people that their wealth probably is illegitimate. This delegitimizing of wealth, to my mind, is such a dangerous thing. It's happening in a developing country like India, where just 1% of the population, less than 10 million people, pay taxes out of a billion plus population, and even in that 1% population, there are 425 people, as in the case of Panama Papers, who have used all the access and opportunities available to them to stash money abroad, open or float offshore entities, and kind of evade taxes, avoid taxes, because in India it was very clear cut that much of it was illegal till 2010 when laws changed. So this delegitimizing of wealth, that notion is so powerful in India, and this is something very dangerous, because it is for the wealthy to actually come out and kind of take corrective steps. I think otherwise it can really be a big problem in developing economies.
Do you have a question? My name is Jinzhou. I'm a prospective student of a Mason Fellow. I have a question for all of you. First of all, thank you for your great jobs that makes the world more transparent and a better place. But my question is that I'm curious about, have you ever been threatened or give some pressure from somebody or from some company when you were doing the investigative job? And what's the biggest challenge in the process, and how did you overcome? Thank you.
Yes, we our partners in many countries, and I'll give you some examples, have received a lot of threats. Our partners in China, for example, we've never been able to even name the reporters that work with us, because they would immediately be targeted. Even if some of them live in Hong Kong now, their families are still in China. So we take a lot of steps to protect their identities. There were reporters that after Panama Papers lost their jobs because their bosses were pressured by politicians in their countries. For example, the case of a Venezuelan reporter who was fired immediately after the stories came out. There were reporters in Ecuador who were personally targeted on a sustained harassment campaign by the president, Correas, at the time, until Correas himself showed up in the Panama Papers, and then he stopped the Twitter campaign. There were reporters in Niger that also had to, that received a lot of digital threats that thankfully didn't turn into any physical harm. There were reporters in Russia that had to temporarily leave their country after Panama Papers. And there are reporters today at the BBC and at The Guardian in the UK who are being sued by Appleby, by the elite law firm at the heart of the Paradise Papers. And we stand with them, and they are going to fight these lawsuits. And the lawsuits are not about the accuracy of the stories, which is fascinating. The lawsuits are about the documents. What the law firms want is for these organizations to give them the documents so they can find the source.
They want the documents that came out of their company, so that they already have.
Yeah, the documents that they already have, and the documents that The Guardian and the BBC don't have, because that's our role.
I think in that regard, that we are that many media outlets and journalists working together helps a lot, because on the one hand side, sometimes there are partners in smaller countries where it's really small media outlets that could be, one lawsuit could basically ruin them. And working in such a big group, this brings new possibilities. Reporters in country X could, for example, think about teaming up with a bigger media outlet, asking them, for example, to publish it first, and them then quoting that outlet, which gives them a little bit of security because they were not like a legal security. On the other hand side, I think everybody out there even thinking about doing harm to one of the team should always be aware that there's hundreds of others, and this person should be aware of the fact that those hundreds others will keep on working on the stories that one colleague has left behind. So this whole idea of working together is also a security measure. For example, when my colleague Bastian and me decided to share the data, this was also security for us, because after a certain point when it became known that we shared the information, there was no basically use in doing harm to us, because the data was out there. It was shared with 100 others journalists. So I think sharing is also a good way of protecting journalists, but those projects give me working what I would still name a luxury zone for journalists. Germany raises awareness within our company and our news desk for the circumstances under which journalists all around the world do have to work. That there are journalists constantly risking their life for wrongdoings being uncovered, and I think we should appreciate that, and we are not saying it often enough, that we owe these colleagues a lot, and yeah, let's be aware of that fact, please.
Yeah. You have a question?
Yes, hello, my name is Hatla, and I run an Arctic initiative here at the Kennedy School. I come from a country that was quite impacted by your work, Iceland, where we actually had a change in government. And my question is kind of a follow-up to the previous question about threats. I'm curious because I remember in Iceland after the news was out, it was easy because this is a very safe place for journalists to really be aggressive and towards our politicians at home, which kind of had this dramatic result. And I'm wondering, do you think that in some cases and other cases where you expect it to have more impact, maybe something similar as in Iceland, that you had less because your reporters were under threat?
I don't know if because the reporters were under threat, it's because there are certain countries where like, can we really change Russia? So Vladimir Putin came out and said, it was remarkable, he said, the reporting is accurate, the $2 billion. The part that they missed is that we used that money to buy musical instruments. So I would like to see change in countries like that, but the conditions, there's no democracy. The conditions are not given even for the kind of protest that you had in Iceland, which is one of the iconic images of the Panama Papers when like half of Iceland, and granted it's a small country, came out to the public square, the old-fashioned public square. I loved it, and with their yogurt called skirt, right? Skirt, and they were throwing. This is the most revered thing they have in Iceland. They love it, and they were throwing it against the parliament building and ousting the government. And we saw that in places like Malta and London and Buenos Aires as well. So the public square and the digital square. But yes, we want, of course, we would have like more, change also takes time. We were amazed that so many things happen so fast. You saw that a year later, the Prime Minister of Pakistan falls, you know? Which, that was amazing because I wasn't expecting that kind of change. That's another one that, you know, really? Like when was the last time that the Middle East lost a prime minister due to a corruption scandal?
Sorry. Just to add to that, you know, say, for instance, what happened in China, just like Russia, you know, you have relatives, very close relatives of 8 of the current or former, you know, Central Politburo committee members, and Xi Jinping's, the current president's brother-in-law, Mao Zedong's grandson. there's so many, 8 of them at least, they were named in Panama and Panama Papers. And, did Chinese people even get to know about it? I think the internet was completely purged of any instances of or references of Panama Papers in whole of China. Mm-hmm. So, the regime types play such a critical role in dissemination of information, or also what impact or outcome such revelations have. So I think that is that clearly suggests that people are at risk, are at huge risk. India, for instance, fortunately for us, we were not really at risk, because I would also imagine, because in the Panama or Paradise Papers, we really didn't have very, very senior politicians or or ministers in the government who are in power and are named in Panama Papers. But I think we have routine cases of journalists dying or being killed for various reasons, when you are actually targeting some of the fascist elements of the society who have connections with political parties, and they are killed. So I think threat to journalists is very critical. We never really say that you need a separate law for journalists, but then yes, I think it is for the governments or for the societies to back journalists across the world.
And as you mentioned Iceland, we are all speaking, and I think most of us know the interview when the Prime Minister walked out when he was questioned to the company Vintris, and then he was ousted. But what not that many people know, that he was replaced by the former finance minister Bjarni Benediktsson, and he appeared in the Panama Papers as well. So I think we people in general forget very fast what happened, and we should sometimes remember ourselves and look up people in our data.
We have time for one last question.
Yes, thank you for your good investigative reporting. Since or during the time of that reporting, there's been global legislation, a lot from the USA, FATCA and the CRS, that tracks global money movements. Do you think this is going to be changing movements like this in legislation, reporting legislation, changing the environment or the landscape of the offshore underworld?
Unfortunately, I must admit, after Panama Papers, I was surprised how many changes I saw, because we had an inquiry commission in the European Union. We had many governments declaring that they want to put public registers of beneficial ownership of companies in place. But now, as nearly 2 years passed, I do see that it was rather like one step ahead and then two steps back. So we saw that in many countries where it was promised to have such registries, for example, to be public, open to the public, to all of us, where we do see those registers now in place, but not being open to the public. And I think that's, again, the problem of people forget too fast. After every ICIJ investigation or publication, we hear the same politicians standing up, because it's so easy. Hey, I want more transparency. But if you then look back after 1 year and after 2 years or even after 5 years, you do see that change is slow, and transparency doesn't have that many advocates. And that's something we should remind our politicians, that, hey, you promised something, where is it now? We want more transparency. I mean, I don't have to tell you, I'm not a US citizen, but I think you have a situation currently where would be favorable if we had more transparency, especially in the sector of companies, where it would be very important that you know who is standing behind a company, who owns a company. And the US especially, I mean, we spoke about Panama now and Iceland and other countries, but we always have to keep in mind the US is a tax haven itself. Speaking about Delaware, Wyoming, the US is constantly slowing the process of bringing more transparency into the world, slowing it down. And it is not always Latin America, it is not always the Caribbean, it's the US. You don't have to go that far from here.
And you talk to the elites in Latin America, is where I come from, and they are like, oh, we don't need to go to the British Virgin Islands or risk our money in Panama. We just have our accounts in the US, our companies in the US. That's where, you know, it takes the least time, you get asked the least questions, and you get your money there, tax-free.
On that cheerful note, please join me in thanking all the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.